wagon wheels creaked against frozen ruts as Clara Whitmore guided her gaunt mare northward from Cedar Falls. Behind her, the town disappeared into morning mist, taking with it the whispers, the sideways glances, and the weight of what had happened in that timber house 3 weeks past. The December wind cut through her wool coat like accusations, but she pulled the reins tighter and pressed on. Wyoming territory stretched before her, vast and unforgiving. Snow had already claimed the buffalo grass, leaving only white emptiness broken by jagged rock formations and the occasional skeleton of a cottonwood tree. The mare's breath came in clouds, each step a struggle through drifts that reached her knees. Clara had packed light, some dried beef, hardtack, a water canteen that would freeze by nightfall, and the Colt .45 her husband had kept loaded by their bed. She didn't know how to use it proper, but its weight against her hip offered a strange comfort. By noon, the sky had turned the color of old pewter. Clara knew what that meant. Her father had taught her to read weather before she could read books. Gray sky at midday means the Lord's sending more snow before nightfall, he'd said. But her father was buried back in Missouri, and the Lord seemed to have turned his face from her entirely. The accident came sudden. One moment the mare was picking her way along a narrow ridge trail. The next she was screaming and falling sideways. Clara barely had time to kick free of the stirrups before the animal went down hard. Her front leg caught in a snow-covered crevice. The crack echoed across the empty land. Clara hit the ground hard, her shoulder taking the worst of it. Pain shot through her like lightning. When she tried to stand, her ankle gave way and she fell again. The mare lay thrashing, that terrible sound horses make when they know they're done for. Easy, girl. Easy now. Clara crawled through the snow to the mare's head, stroking the white blaze between her eyes. The leg was broke clean through, bone showing white against blood and snow. Clara's hands shook as she pulled the Colt from her belt. She'd never shot nothing in her life, but there was no choice in it. The gun was heavier than she remembered. She pressed the barrel behind the mare's ear like she'd seen men do. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and pulled the trigger. The sound split the world apart. Ravens lifted from distant pines. The mare went still. Clara sat in the snow beside the dead horse, her ankle throbbing, shoulder on fire, and nowhere to go. The gray sky was already dropping the first flakes of what would be a killing storm. She thought maybe this was fitting, to die out here where no one would find her, where the snow would cover her sins along with her bones. That's when she saw him. He came out of the storm like something formed from it, tall and broad on a dark horse. At first she thought she was seeing things, the way folks do when the cold gets too deep in their bones, but the figure kept coming, steady and real. Clara fumbled for the Colt, though she'd just emptied it into her horse. The rider stopped 20 feet out, hands visible on his saddle horn. He wore a long duster coat and a hat pulled low, but she could see he was clean-shaved. Unlike most men in these parts, he studied her, the dead horse, the way she held her ankle. "Ma'am," his voice was low. "Careful. That ankle looks bad bent." Clara said nothing. She'd learned these past months that silence was safer than words. The man swung down from his horse slow, like he was approaching a spooked animal. He was even taller than she'd thought, moving with the easy grace of someone who lived in his body. His face was weathered but not old, maybe 35 to her 28. Dark eyes that gave away nothing. "Storm's coming in hard," he said. "You stay here. You'll freeze before morning." "Maybe that's what I aim to do." The words came out before she could stop them. Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. Maybe so. But that horse didn't die so you could give up easy. He nodded at her mare. Fine animal. Deserves better than her rider freezing to death beside her. Clara felt tears threaten. She bit them back hard. "I don't know you. Name's Asher Boone. Got a place about 2 miles north. Nothing fancy, but it's got walls and a roof." He stayed where he was, not pushing. "I ain't asking your name or your business, just offering shelter from the storm." The snow was falling harder now. Clara could barely feel her fingers. Her choices were simple. Trust this stranger or die, after what she'd been through. Dying didn't seem so bad, but something in his manner, the way he kept his distance, the steadiness of his voice, made her nod. Moving her was awkward business. Her ankle couldn't take weight, and her shoulders screamed when she tried to use that arm. Asher approached careful, asked permission before touching her, then lifted her like she weighed nothing at all. He smelled of leather and wood smoke and horse, familiar smells that made her chest tight with memory. He settled her on his horse, then swung up behind her. His arms came around to take the reins, and Clara tried not to notice the solid warmth of him. It had been a long time since she'd felt safe near any man. The ride was quiet, except for the wind and the horse's steady breathing. Asher's place appeared through the snow like something conjured. A low log cabin with a barn attached, smoke rising from a stone chimney. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd hoped to find. He carried her inside, set her careful in a chair by the fire. The cabin was sparse but clean, a bed in one corner, table and 2 chairs, shelves with a few dishes. A rifle hung over the door. What struck her most was what wasn't there. No woman's touch, no softness anywhere. This was a man who lived alone and expected to stay that way. Asher built up the fire without speaking, then fetched snow in a bucket to melt for water. He pulled off her boot gentle as he could, but Clara still had to bite her lip bloody to keep from crying out. The ankle was swollen twice its size, purple-black already. "Not broke," he said after careful prodding, "but you won't walk on it for a week at least." He wrapped it tight with strips of clean cloth, his hand steady and surprisingly gentle. The shoulder was harder. Clara had to let him unbutton her coat and shirt enough to see. His face stayed carefully neutral as he exposed the mass of bruises, the new ones from the fall mixed with older ones, yellow-green, in the shape of fingers, if he recognized what they were. He didn't say, just fetched more cloth and bound her shoulder to keep it still. "Thank you," Clara managed when he was done. Asher moved to the stove, started warming something in a pot. "You'll need food. When's the last time you ate?" She couldn't remember. Maybe yesterday morning, maybe the day before. Time had gone strange since that night. He brought her a bowl of stew, venison and wild onions and something else she couldn't name. It was the first hot food she'd had in days, and she had to force herself to eat slow. Outside, the storm had turned into a proper blizzard. Wind howled around the corners of the cabin, but inside was warm and still. Asher sat at the table cleaning his rifle, not looking at her, not asking questions. The silence between them wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't threatening neither. "I can pay," Clara said finally. "For the shelter, I have a little money. Don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" He looked up then, met her eyes straight on. "Nothing. Storm would have killed you. Couldn't leave you to it. Simple as that." Clara studied his face, looking for the lie, the hidden want. Every man wanted something, but Asher just went back to his rifle, the conversation done as far as he was concerned. As the day wore on into evening, Clara found herself stealing glances at him. He moved around the cabin quiet, tending the fire, checking the horses in the barn, preparing another simple meal. There was a steadiness to him, a calm that came from a man who'd made peace with solitude when it came time for sleep. Asher gave her the bed without discussion, settling himself on a bedroll by the fire. Clara lay in the dark listening to the storm and the sound of his breathing, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She wasn't afraid. She didn't trust him, might never trust a man again, but she wasn't afraid. Tomorrow she would have to figure out what came next. Tomorrow she would have to decide if she was running toward something or just away. But tonight, with walls between her and the storm, with a stranger's inexplicable kindness warming her more than the fire, Clara Whitmore let herself rest. The wind howled on, covering her tracks, erasing her path from Cedar Falls. By morning, it would be like she'd never existed at all. And maybe, Clara thought as sleep finally took her, that was exactly what she needed. Clara woke to pale light filtering through frost-covered windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling, the smell of pine logs and old smoke. Then memory rushed back, The fall, the stranger, this cabin that wasn't hers. Asher was already up, standing by the stove with his back to her. He'd changed into a clean shirt, and Clara found herself noticing the breadth of his shoulders, the way he moved with such quiet purpose. When he turned, she quickly closed her eyes, feigning sleep. She heard him approach, felt him studying her. Then his footsteps retreated, and the cabin door opened and closed, soft as a whisper. Alone. Clara pushed herself upright. Her ankle throbbed fierce, but the swelling had gone down some. Her shoulder was stiff but workable. She swung her legs over the bed's edge, taking stock of her surroundings in proper daylight. The cabin was built solid. Logs chinked tight against the weather, but there were things she'd missed in yesterday's pain and exhaustion. On a shelf above the window sat a wooden horse, carved with a child's awkward enthusiasm. A woman's shawl hung on a peg by the door, faded blue wool, mended careful in several places. In the corner, half hidden behind the woodbox, a smaller pair of boots gathered dust. Clara's chest tightened. This man who lived alone hadn't always been alone. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air, and Asher carrying an armload of split wood. He saw her sitting up and nodded. Nothing more. "Horses need tending," he said, stacking the wood neat by the stove. "Won't be long." "I can help." "No." Not harsh, just firm. "That ankle needs rest." After he left again, Clara tried standing. She made it 3 steps before the pain drove her back to the bed. Helplessness burned in her throat. She'd sworn after Thomas died that she'd never depend on anyone again. Yet here she was, trapped by her own body in a stranger's home. When Asher returned, he brought the cold in with him, cheeks reddened by wind. He fixed breakfast, flapjacks and coffee, and they ate in customary silence. But Clara couldn't stop her eyes from wandering to those small boots, that carefully mended shawl. After breakfast, Asher surprised her. "Need to check the horses proper. You want to come?" Clara looked at him uncertain. "I can't walk." "Don't need to." He fetched a thick coat from a peg, man size but cleaner than what she'd been wearing. "Barn's warm enough, and you've been cooped up. Fresh air might do good." He carried her like before, gentle but impersonal, settling her on a hay bale in the barn. The space was warmer than she'd expected, filled with the comfortable sounds of horses eating. Besides Asher's dark gelding, there were 3 mares and a yearling colt, all well-fed and groomed. "You raise horses?" Clara asked. "Some." Asher moved among them with obvious affection. "Checking hooves, running hands along their necks. Break them for folks who can't or won't do it themselves." One of the mares, a pretty sorrel, stretched her neck toward Clara, nostrils flaring curious. Without thinking, Clara reached out, let the horse lip at her palm. "That's Ruby," Asher said. "She's got opinions about everything." It was the most he'd said at once since she'd arrived. Clara found herself almost smiling. "She reminds me of—" She stopped, the words dying. "Of what?" "Nothing, just a horse I used to know." Asher studied her a moment, then went back to his work. But he kept talking, quiet observations about each horse, their quirks and temperaments. Clara found herself relaxing, drawn into this simple world of hay and horse warmth, and a man's gentle hands on restless animals. When he was done, he didn't immediately carry her back inside. Instead, he sat on another hay bale, a careful distance away. "That mare of yours," he said. "The one you had to put down. She meant something to you." Clara's throat closed. She belonged to someone I knew, before." "Takes courage. Doing what you did. Most folks would have left her to suffer. Wasn't courage." The words came bitter. Was just another thing that needed doing. Asher was quiet a while. Then, "I had to put down my boy's pony. 3 winters back. Colic. Boy cried for days." Clara's breath caught. There it was, confirmation of what those small boots meant. Your son was... The word fell between them, heavy as stone. She wanted to ask what happened, but the set of his shoulders warned her off. Instead, she said, "I'm sorry. Long time ago now." But it wasn't. She could see that in the way his hands stilled, the careful nothing in his face. 3 winters wasn't long at all when it came to that kind of losing. Back in the cabin, Clara insisted on helping with chores she could do sitting. Asher resisted at first, but she was stubborn, and eventually he brought her mending, his own clothes, nothing that would have belonged to anyone else. Clara was grateful for that small mercy. Her fingers remembered the work, even after months of different kinds of labor. She'd been good at this once, before Thomas, when she'd lived with her aunt in St. Louis and taken in sewing for pocket money. The rhythm soothed her, gave her hands something useful to do. Asher worked at the table, oiling tack and sharpening tools. They fell into an easy quiet, broken only by the fire's crackle and the wind outside. It was the kind of companionable silence Clara had thought she'd never feel again. "You do fine work," Asher said, examining a shirt she'd mended. "My aunt taught me, said a woman ought to have skills beyond pretty smiles." Clara bit her thread, started on another tier. "Though pretty smiles got me about as far as sewing did, in the end." She hadn't meant to say that last part. Asher looked at her sharp, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Your husband," he said, "not a question. Dead." The word came out flat. 3 weeks passed. "That why you were riding north in a blizzard with no destination?" Clara's hand stilled on the cloth. "You said you wouldn't ask questions." "I did." He went back to his work. "My apology." But the damage was done. The peace of the morning shattered, leaving Clara remembering why she was here, what she was running from. She set the mending aside, suddenly exhausted. That night, she woke to sounds that froze her blood. A man's voice, crying out in terror or rage or both. Clara lay rigid, memories of Thomas's nighttime rages flooding back. But then she realized it wasn't coming toward her. The cries came from Asher's bedroll by the fire. She could see him in the ember light, thrashing against invisible enemies, his face contorted with grief so raw it hurt to witness. Names tumbled from his lips. Margaret, Samuel, and then just wordless sounds of loss. Clara knew she should wake him, knew the decent thing was to spare him this unconscious revealing. But she also knew the danger of waking a man from nightmares. Thomas had broken her wrist once when she'd tried, so she lay still, watching Asher fight his demons alone. Eventually he quieted, curling in on himself like a child. Clara stared at the ceiling until dawn, thinking about the weight of ghosts, how they followed you no matter how far you rode. Morning came gray and bitter. Asher rose as usual, but Clara could see the night's toll in the shadows under his eyes, the careful way he held himself. He made breakfast without speaking, and Clara matched his silence. The day stretched tense. Clara worked at mending. Asher disappeared into the barn for hours. When he came back, he wouldn't meet her eyes. She recognized the shame, had felt it herself after Thomas saw her cry. "You called out in your sleep," she said finally, gentle as she could. "Margaret and Samuel." Asher's hand stilled on the harness he was fixing. For a long moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. "My wife, my boy." His voice was rough as rusty iron. "Fever took them, both in the same week." Clara's chest ached. "How old was Samuel?" 6, would be 9 now. If... He stopped, shook his head. "Margaret was the strong one. I always figured if something happened, it'd be me that went first. She knew how to do everything, keep everything running. I was just the man who broke horses." "You're still here," Clara said. "That takes its own kind of strength." Asher looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt something shift between them. Recognition. Maybe. The understanding of one survivor to another. "Sometimes I think I'm not," he said. "Still here. Sometimes I think I died with them. And this is just my body walking around, pretending." Clara knew that feeling intimate as breath. "But you keep the horses, you fixed the barn, you pulled a stranger from the snow. Habits." But there was something in his eyes now, a flicker of what might be gratitude. "Margaret always said I was too stubborn to quit anything proper." That night, Asher gave Clara the bed again, but she insisted he take an extra blanket for his bedroll. It wasn't much, but it was acknowledgement of what he'd shared, of what they both carried. As snow began to fall again outside, Clara wrote in the small journal she'd brought, the first words she'd put down since leaving Cedar Falls. I am staying with a man who speaks in silences, who tends his grief like others tend gardens, careful, constant, expecting nothing to bloom. I thought I was running toward emptiness, but I found another soul already there, waiting. We are two ghosts pretending at living, and somehow that makes it bearable. Tomorrow he will watch me when he thinks I don't see. Tomorrow I will pretend not to notice. We are building something here in this frozen place, though neither of us could say what. Only that it feels like breathing after months of holding breath. She closed the journal, hid it careful in her few belongings. Through the darkness, she could hear Asher's steady breathing. No nightmares tonight. Outside, the wind sang lonely songs, but inside, two broken people shared warmth against the cold. And that was enough. That was everything. The riders appeared at midday, dark shapes against fresh snow. Clara saw them first through the window, 5 men picking their way up the trail Asher used for supply runs. Her blood turned to ice water. She knew that deliberate way of riding, men who expected to find what they were looking for. Asher was in the barn. Clara forced herself to move calm, limping to the door despite the fire in her ankle. By the time she reached the barn, her face was white with pain and fear. "Riders coming," she managed. 5 of them. Asher took one look at her face and understood. He moved quick, leading her back inside, settling her in the chair farthest from the door. His rifle came down from its pegs, and he checked the loads with steady hands. "You know them?" he asked. Clara's throat worked. "Maybe. One might be. Thomas had a cousin, Jacob Whitmore. He never liked me much. Stay quiet. Let me handle the talking." The knock came heavy, demanding. Asher opened the door part way, rifle visible but not threatening. "Gentlemen, looking for someone," the lead rider said. Clara recognized the voice and fought not to react. Jacob Whitmore. Sure enough. Woman traveling alone. Horse probably gave out in the storm few days back. Haven't seen any woman. Asher's voice was flat, uninterested. Storm was bad enough I barely made it back from town myself. Jacob pushed closer, trying to see past Asher into the cabin. Woman's about 28, brown hair, pretty thing, when she keeps her mouth shut. Goes by Clara Whitmore. Like I said, haven't seen anyone. Sure about that? Another rider spoke up. Tracks led north from Cedar Falls. This is about the only place she could have sheltered. Storm covered any tracks days ago. Asher shifted slightly, the rifle more visible now. You're welcome to water your horses, but then I'd appreciate you moving on. I got work to do. Clara held herself still as stone, but her heart hammered so loud she was sure they'd hear it. Through a gap in Asher's stance, she could see Jacob's face, that same mean look Thomas used to get when things weren't going his way. "See, here's the thing," Jacob said, voice going soft and dangerous. "That woman killed my cousin, shot him dead in his own home. Now she's run off, and we aim to bring her back for justice. Sorry for your loss." Asher didn't move. "Still haven't seen her. Mind if we look around, just to be thorough?" "I do mind." Now the rifle lifted slightly. "This is private property. You got no badge, no warrant, just your word about some woman and a killing." The tension stretched wire-tight. Clara could see Jacob weighing his options, calculating whether Asher would really shoot, whether it was worth the risk. Finally, Jacob stepped back. "Well then, if you do see her, you be sure to let us know. There's folks in Cedar Falls want justice for Thomas Whitmore. Good man, struck down by his own wife. Shameful thing. I'll keep that in mind." The riders turned slow, reluctant, but Jacob looked back once more, and his eyes found Clara through the gap. She saw recognition flash across his face, saw his mouth open. Then Asher stepped full into the doorway, blocking the view. "Safe travels, gentlemen. Weather's turning again. For a moment, Clara thought Jacob would call out, would bring the others back, but something in Asher's stance, the quiet threat of him, made Jacob think better of it. The riders continued down the trail, disappearing into the tree line. Asher closed the door, barred it solid. Then he turned to Clara, who was shaking like cottonwood leaves in wind. "He saw me," she whispered. "Jacob saw me. Maybe?" Asher set the rifle within reach, moved to the window to watch. Question is what he'll do about it. Clara pressed her hands to her face, trying to think through the panic. They'll come back. With more men, maybe the sheriff. Sheriff's 2 days' ride in good weather, longer in this. Asher's voice stayed calm, which helped steady her some. "And they got no proof you're here, just a glimpse through a doorway." "You don't understand." Clara's voice cracked. "Thomas, what I did, they won't let it go. His family's got money, influence. They'll—" "What did you do?" The question hung between them. Clara looked at this man who'd sheltered her, defended her, asked nothing of her. She owed him truth, at least. He was beating me, like he'd done before, only worse. Drunk and mean and— She touched her ribs, where the deepest bruises were still healing. "I pushed him, just trying to get away, but he fell backward, hit his head on the hearth corner." Clara waited for Asher to pull away, to look at her different. Instead, he asked, "Was he dead when you left?" "Yes, I checked his breathing, tried to wake him, but the blood—" She shuddered. "So much blood." "And then?" "I packed what I could. Took his horse. Mine was already sold to pay his gambling debts. I thought maybe I could make it to California, start over where no one knew me." Asher was quiet a long moment. Then, "Man who beats his wife deserves whatever comes. You did what you had to." The simple acceptance of it broke something in Clara. Tears came hot and shameful, and she couldn't stop them. She'd held it all in so long, the fear, the guilt, the relief that made the guilt worse. She didn't see Asher move, but suddenly he was kneeling beside her chair, pressing a handkerchief into her hands. He didn't touch her otherwise, didn't try to comfort with words, just stayed close, solid and real, until the storm of weeping passed. When Clara could breathe again, she found Asher had moved to the stove, heating water for tea. Such a simple, domestic thing, but it grounded her. "What do we do now?" she asked. "First, you tell me everything about Jacob Whitmore. What kind of man he is, who he'd bring, how he thinks." So Clara talked, laying out the whole sorry web of the Whitmore family. Thomas had been the youngest of 3 brothers, spoiled and coddled. Jacob was the middle son, smart enough to be dangerous, but not smart enough to be wise. He'd wanted Clara for himself before Thomas claimed her, and that rejection had festered. He won't go to the law first, Clara concluded. He'll want to handle it himself, make himself the hero who brought back his cousin's killer. How many men can he gather? Maybe a dozen. Thomas owed money all over town. Some of those men might ride with Jacob if they think they'll get paid from my capture. Asher nodded, thinking, dozen men, maybe more. Take them time to organize, plan. We've got maybe 2 days. We? Clara looked at him sharp. This isn't your fight. I should leave tonight. Draw them away. On that ankle, in this weather, Asher shook his head. You'd make it maybe a mile before they caught you. Better than bringing trouble to your door. Trouble came the moment I brought you inside. His dark eyes met hers steady. I made that choice. I'll stand by it. Why? The word burst out desperate. You don't even know me. Why would you risk? Because I've been dead 3 years. Asher said quiet. Going through motions, tending horses, waiting for nothing. Then you showed up, more ghost than woman. And for the first time since Margaret, he stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I'm tired of being dead. If I'm going to die for real, least it'll be for something worthwhile. Clara stared at him. This man she'd known less than a week, who was offering to spill blood for her. I can't ask that of you. You're not asking, I'm choosing. He stood. All business now. Can you shoot? No. Thomas never let me touch his guns. Then we'll fix that. A dozen men coming. We'll need every advantage. The rest of the day passed in preparation. Asher taught Clara to load and shoot his spare revolver, patient with her shaking hands and flinching. She was no marksman, but by evening she could hit a target at close range. They set up the cabin for defense, water barrels filled, ammunition sorted, furniture arranged for cover. Asher showed her where to hide if things went bad, a root cellar with a hidden entrance. As they worked, something shifted between them. The careful distance collapsed under shared purpose. When their hands brushed passing ammunition, neither pulled away. When Clara struggled with the rifle's weight, Asher stood behind her, steadying her arms, and she let herself lean back against his solid warmth just for a moment. That night, they didn't pretend at normal routine. Both sat by the fire, too aware of what might come to sleep. Clara found herself studying Asher's profile in the firelight, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands moved gentle despite their size. "Tell me about Margaret," she said suddenly. Asher glanced at her, surprised. "What do you want to know?" "Anything, everything. If we might die tomorrow, I'd like to know who you were before." So Asher talked, halting at first, then easier, about the woman who'd tamed his wild ways, who'd given him a son, who'd made him believe in futures, about Sunday dinners and harvest dances and the way she'd hummed while hanging laundry. "She would have liked you," he said finally, "would have admired your grit. You think she'd forgive you for helping another woman?" Asher was quiet so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Margaret always said the only sin was turning away from someone in need. Said that's what separated humans from animals, the choice to help, even when it costs." The fire burned low. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft as secrets. Clara felt time slipping away, felt the weight of words unsaid. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good. Means you're not foolish." "Are you scared?" Asher turned to look at her full on. "Not of dying. Not anymore." His voice dropped lower. "Scared of other things, maybe." "What things?" Instead of answering, he reached across the space between them, covered her hand with his. The touch was electric, sending warmth up Clara's arm and straight to her heart. She turned her palm up, threading their fingers together. They sat like that as the fire died to embers, hands clasped, saying everything without words. Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. Not healing exactly, but the possibility of it, the promise that she might survive this, might find something beyond mere surviving. When the cold finally drove them to bed, Asher walked her to the corner, helped her settle comfortable with her injured ankle elevated. But before he turned away, Clara caught his sleeve. "Stay close tonight?" she whispered. "Not just close, so I know you're there." Asher studied her face, then nodded. He pulled his bedroll near, close enough she could reach out and touch him if needed, close enough to hear his breathing in the dark. Clara lay awake, feeling the weight of his presence, the safety of it. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight, she wasn't alone. Tonight, someone would fight beside her instead of against her. "Asher?" she whispered into the darkness. "Yeah. Thank you for choosing." His hand found hers across the small distance, squeezed once, then let go. "Thank you for letting me." Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering their tracks, buying them time. Inside, two damaged souls faced the storm together, and found that together felt like something mighty close to hope. Dawn came pale and quiet, the storm having blown itself out in the night. Clara woke to find Asher already gone from his bedroll, the space where he'd slept still holding warmth. She could hear him moving outside, checking the horses, maintaining the fiction of normalcy at breakfast. She finally found courage for the words that had haunted her sleep. Thomas wasn't sick. That's what everyone believes. But it wasn't true. Asher paused in pouring coffee, waited. He was drinking more toward the end. Said I was the reason, that I'd trapped him, ruined his prospects, that night. Clara's hands trembled around her cup. He came at me with the poker from the fireplace. Said he'd tell everyone I fell down the stairs. She touched her ribs again. A habit now when remembering. I grabbed for it. We struggled. When I pushed him away, he stumbled backward. His head caught the hearth corner so hard it cracked like an egg. Self-defense, Asher said firmly. That's not how the law sees it. Not when it's a wife against her husband. Clara's laugh held no humor. The sheriff in Cedar Falls, he told me once that a man's got a right to discipline his household. Told me that after Thomas broke my arm and I tried to file a complaint. Asher set down the coffee pot with careful control. Man hits a woman. He's no man at all. Easy to say out here. Harder when the whole town thinks Thomas Whitmore was a fine, upstanding citizen who just had the bad luck to marry beneath him. Clara met his eyes. I killed him. Asher. Maybe not meaning to, but he's just as dead, and I'm not sorry. That's the worst part. I'm not sorry he's gone. Why should you be? Asher moved around the table, crouched before her chair so they were eye level. Man terrorized you, hurt you, would have killed you eventually. You survived. That's nothing to apologize for. The intensity in his voice broke something loose in Clara. The blood wouldn't stop. I tried to stop it, pressed my shawl against his head, but it just kept coming. And all I could think was, finally. Finally, I could breathe without wondering if today was the day he'd go too far. Clara, Asher's voice was gentle now. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, expecting judgment, finding only understanding. I killed a man once, he said. Spring of '79. He and 2 others rode onto my land, started making trouble. One of them said things about Margaret, what they'd do when I wasn't around. His jaw tightened at the memory. I told them to leave. They laughed, so I made them leave. What happened? 2 rode off when the shooting started. The 3rd didn't. Asher's eyes never left hers. I buried him out past the tree line. Never told Margaret the details, but she knew. Women always know. Did you feel guilty? No. I felt relieved. Same as you. He took her hands in his, calloused thumbs brushing her knuckles. Some killings are wrong. Some are necessary. You did what you had to do to survive. I'd have done the same in your place. Hell, I'd have done it for you if I'd been there. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Clara's chest tight. You barely know me. I know enough. His hands tightened on hers. I know you're strong enough to survive what would break most people. Know you're kind enough to grieve a horse that wasn't even yours. Know you trust me enough to sleep defenseless in my home. Clara felt tears threaten again, but these were different, cleaner somehow. I was so tired of being afraid all the time. You don't have to be afraid here. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Clara found herself leaning forward, drawn by something stronger than fear or sense. Asher's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't felt fall. Clara! She closed the distance, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, 2 people remembering how to be gentle. Then Asher made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, and Clara felt something wild and hungry wake in her chest. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. Asher rested his forehead against hers. We should stop. This isn't the time. I've had 3 years of the wrong time, Clara whispered. 3 years of being touched in anger. Let me have this. Let me remember what it's like to choose. Asher pulled back enough to search her face. Whatever he found there must have convinced him, because he stood, drawing her up with him. Clara's ankle protested, but she didn't care, not when Asher lifted her easy as breathing, carried her to his bed. He set her down gentle, then hesitated. You're sure? Instead of answering, Clara pulled him down beside her. This time when they kissed, it was deeper, needier. Asher's hand stayed respectful, but Clara could feel him trembling with restraint. I won't break, she whispered against his mouth. Not from kindness. What followed was nothing like her marriage bed. Asher touched her like she was precious, taking his time, learning what made her breath catch. When he found the bruises, old and new, he kissed each one like a benediction. Clara had to bite her lip to keep from sobbing at the tenderness of it. She'd forgotten her body could feel pleasure instead of pain. Forgotten that touch could be a conversation instead of a demand. Asher reminded her with patient hands and whispered words, until Clara was shaking with something that had nothing to do with fear. After, they lay tangled together, skin cooling in the morning air. Clara traced the scars on Asher's chest, a map of survival matching her own. She felt raw, cracked open, but somehow whole at the same time. "I didn't know it could be like that," she admitted softly. Asher's arm tightened around her. "It should always be like that, willing and wanted and—" He stopped, pressing his face into her hair. "And what?" "Sacred," he finished, so quiet she almost missed it. Margaret used to say the marriage bed was sacred, not because some preacher said words, but because two people chose to be vulnerable together. Clara turned in his arms to study his face. "Do you feel guilty about this?" Asher considered. "Thought I might, but no, just feel awake for the first time in 3 years. I feel awake." They might have stayed there all day, relearning comfort, but the world wouldn't wait. By noon, Asher was outside setting up watch positions while Clara practiced with the revolver. Her hands were steadier now, her aim improving. She was reloading when Asher came back, expression grim. "Riders coming, not the same ones. These are moving careful, trying to use tree cover." Clara's stomach dropped. "How many?" "Can't tell yet, at least 6. He handed her the rifle. "Remember what I taught you, and if I tell you to run, I'm not leaving you." "Clara." "No." She stood, checking the revolver was secure at her hip. "We stand together or not at all." Asher looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. The riders were close enough now to count. 8 men, spreading out to surround the cabin. Clara recognized Jacob at the lead, and her blood chilled. "Clara Whitmore!" Jacob's voice carried clear across the snow. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful and face justice for what you did." Asher stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. "Already told you she's not here. Don't lie for her. Boone, we know who you are. Know about your wife and boy. You want to die for a murderer? Only murderers I see are the ones circling my home like wolves." One of the other men called out. "Just send her out. Boone, this ain't your fight. Made it my fight when you brought guns to my door." Clara moved to the window, sighting down the rifle barrel like Asher taught her. Her hands were remarkably steady, considering. "Last chance," Jacob warned. "Send her out or we're coming in. You're welcome to try." The first shot shattered the morning quiet. Clara couldn't tell who fired first, but suddenly the air was full of gunfire. She picked a target, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, but she saw the man clutch his leg and go down. Asher was a deadly calm presence, picking his shots with terrible efficiency. 2 men fell before the others found proper cover. "The barn!" Clara shouted. Seeing movement, Asher spun, fired. A man tumbled from the hayloft door, but more were coming. Using the outbuildings for cover, Clara counted muzzle flashes. Still 5 men shooting. A window exploded. Clara felt something sting her cheek, tasted blood. She kept shooting, kept loading. The world narrowed to survival. Then Asher grunted, stumbled. Clara turned to see red spreading across his shirt at the shoulder. "No!" She caught him as he sagged against the doorframe. "Get inside. Keep shooting," he gritted out. "Don't let them get close." But Clara was already tearing at his shirt, seeing the ugly hole the bullet had punched through. Blood came steady but not spurting. Missed the artery at least. "Clara, down!" She dropped just as bullets chewed splinters from the doorframe where her head had been. Asher dragged himself to cover, still trying to reload one-handed. "Give me the rifle," Clara said. When he hesitated, she grabbed it. "Trust me." She thought of Thomas, of every time he'd cornered her, hurt her, made her feel helpless. All that fear transformed into something cold and focused. Clara sighted on Jacob, who was creeping closer to the cabin. The shot took him center mass. Jacob looked surprised as he fell, like he couldn't believe she'd actually done it. The remaining men hesitated, their leader down. In that moment of uncertainty, one called out, "Hell with this. Whitmore ain't paying us enough to die." Two of them broke cover, running for their horses. The others followed, suddenly more interested in escape than vengeance. Clara kept the rifle trained on them until they disappeared down the trail. Then she was at Asher's side, pressing cloth against his shoulder. How bad? Had worse, but his face was gray with pain. You did good, real good. Stop talking. Clara worked fast, remembering what her aunt had taught her about wounds. The bullet had gone through clean, which was good. She packed it with clean cloth, bound it tight. Asher caught her hand as she worked. "Clara, if they come back, they won't." She was surprised by her own certainty. Not without Jacob, and not after losing 4 men. She helped him inside, got him comfortable in bed. As she worked, Asher watched her with something like wonder. "You saved us," he said. "We saved each other." Clara sat on the bed edge, exhausted now that the danger had passed. That's what partners do. Partners. Asher tested the word, managed a slight smile despite the pain. "I like that." Clara leaned down, kissed him careful. "Rest now. I'll keep watch." "Stay close." "Always," she promised, and meant it. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the blood, the bodies, the evidence of violence. But inside, 2 people who'd found each other in the wilderness held tight to their unexpected salvation. They'd fought for it, bled for it, killed for it. And in the end, that made it worth more than all the easy love in the world. Clara kept her promise, staying close through the long afternoon as Asher slept fitfully. She cleaned his wound, forced him to drink water, whispered fierce promises about their future, because they would have one now. They'd paid for it in gunpowder and courage, and no one could take it from them. When Asher woke near sunset, clear-eyed and focused, he found Clara writing in her journal. She looked up, smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "What are you writing?" "Our story," she said. "The true one, so we remember." "What does it say?" Clara looked back at her words, then at him. "It says, today we chose each other. Today we chose to live. Everything else comes after." Asher held out his good hand, and Clara took it. Outside, the winter evening gathered its shadows, but inside, 2 survivors began the slow, careful work of building something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was, but it would be theirs. The news traveled fast, as bad news always does in frontier towns. Within a week, word reached them through Asher's neighbor, old Pete Hutchins, who'd come to check on them after hearing gunshots echo across the valley. "Whole town's talking," Pete said, accepting coffee from Clara with a nod of thanks. "Jacob Whitmore's dead, 3 others too. Rest are spinning tales about a witch woman who enchanted Boone into defending her." Clara's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "They're saying I'm a witch?" "Saying all sorts of things." Pete was a straightforward man, worn lean by years of mountain living. "Sheriff's been asking questions. Wants to know what happened up here." Asher, his arm still in a sling, met Pete's eyes steady. "Men came to my home with guns, threatened me and Miss Clara. We defended ourselves." "That's what I figured." Pete sipped his coffee, thoughtful. "Question is, will Sheriff Morrison see it that way?" Clara sank into a chair, the weight of it all pressing down. She'd thought killing Jacob would end it, but she should have known better. Violence had a way of spreading, like blood and water. "There's more," Pete continued. "Some folks in Cedar Falls are saying Clara killed her husband, saying she should stand trial for murder. Thomas Whitmore beat his wife." Asher said flat. "Everyone in that town knew it and did nothing. Now they want justice?" Pete held up a weathered hand. "I'm just telling you what's being said. Morrison's a fair man. Mostly, but he's got pressure from the Whitmore family. They want someone to pay for their losses." After Pete left, Clara stood at the window watching snow fall endless and white. I should leave. Tonight. Draw them away from you. No. Asher. No. He came up behind her, good arm wrapping around her waist. We've been through this. You run now, you'll be running forever, and I'll be damned if I let you face this alone. Clara leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. So what do? We get married. Clara turned in his arms, startled. What? Think about it. Asher's dark eyes were serious. A wife can't testify against her husband. And it changes the story. Not some woman hiding out with a man, but my wife, in her own home, defending herself against armed intruders. You'd marry me just for legal protection? Clara. His hand came up to cup her face. I'd marry you because I can't imagine waking up without you beside me. Because you've brought life back to this place. To me. The legal protection is just good sense on top of it. Clara searched his face. It's been barely 2 weeks since we met. You know anyone out here who waited longer? This isn't St. Louis society. This is survival. His thumb traced her cheekbone, gentle. I'm not Thomas. I'll never raise a hand to you, never try to own you, but I'd like to call you wife, if you'll have me. The proposal was unlike anything from fairy stories. No bended knee, no pretty words. Just truth, plain and simple, from a man who'd proven himself with blood and patience. Yes, Clara whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened through. Pete and his wife Ellen as witnesses. Clara wore her cleanest dress. Asher his Sunday shirt. The words were simple, the ceremony brief. But when Asher kissed her at the end, Clara felt something settle in her chest. A rightness, a belonging she'd never known. That night, as they lay together as husband and wife, Clara traced patterns on Asher's chest. Do you think Margaret would understand? Asher was quiet long enough she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, I think she'd be glad I found my way back to living. She never could stand to see things go to waste. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. He pressed a kiss to her hair. You're not her, and I'm not him. We're something new, built from what's left. That's enough. More than enough. But the world wouldn't leave them be. 2 weeks after the wedding, Sheriff Morrison arrived with 3 deputies. Clara watched from the window as Asher went out to meet them, every line of his body ready for trouble. Mr. Boone. Morrison was an older man, gray-bearded and careful. I need to speak with your wife. About what? The death of Thomas Whitmore, and the incident 2 weeks past involving Jacob Whitmore and others. My wife defended herself both times. Nothing more to say. That may be, but I need to hear it from her. Morrison's voice stayed reasonable. I can do it here, friendly-like, or I can take her back to town. Your choice. Clara stepped onto the porch before Asher could answer. I'll speak with you. Sheriff. Morrison studied her, the healing cut on her cheek, the way she stood straight despite everything. Mrs. Boone, I need to know what happened with your first husband. So Clara told it. All of it. The beatings, the threats, that final night. She kept her voice steady. Met Morrison's eyes direct. When she finished, silence stretched across the snowy yard. Can anyone verify this? Morrison asked finally. The bruises verified it. Clara said bitter. The broken bones verified it, but no one wanted to see. I saw, a voice called out. Ellen Hutchins climbed down from their wagon, Pete helping her over the rough ground. I saw what that man did to her. Morrison turned. Mrs. Hutchins? I treated Clara once, about 6 months ago. Thomas brought her to me instead of the doctor. Didn't want questions. He said, Ellen's weathered face was fierce with memory. Broken ribs, bruises shaped like boot prints. She begged me not to say anything, terrified of what he'd do if I spoke up. Why didn't you report it? Ellen laughed harsh. To who? The sheriff who drinks with Thomas Whitmore. The judge who owes money to the Whitmore family. We all knew. Sheriff, every woman in Cedar Falls knew. We just couldn't do nothing about it. Morrison looked uncomfortable. That's a serious accusation. Mrs. Hutchins. It's a serious truth. Ellen moved to stand beside Clara. This woman survived what would have killed most. Then she defended herself and her new husband against armed men. If that's a crime, then the law's wrong, not her. The sheriff was quiet a long moment, his deputies shifting restless behind him. Finally, Morrison sighed. Mrs. Boone, I need you to swear on this Bible that Thomas Whitmore's death was self-defense. Clara placed her hand on the offered book. I swear before God that I was defending my life when Thomas died. And the incident with Jacob Whitmore. 8 armed men surrounded our home, Asher cut in. Threatened to kill us both. We defended ourselves as was our right. Morrison nodded slow. I've seen the bodies. Shot from the front, all of them. Men who came looking for a fight and found one. He put the Bible away. Far as I'm concerned, this matter is closed. Self-defense, both times. But he paused before mounting his horse. Word of advice, Mrs. Boone. The Whitmore family won't let this go easy. They've got money, influence. Might be best if you and your husband found somewhere else to settle. After they'd gone, Clara sagged against Asher. He's right, we can't stay here. Maybe not forever. Asher agreed. But we're not running. We'll leave when we choose. Go where we want. Together. That night, Clara woke to find Asher standing by the window, watching the darkness. She rose, wrapped a blanket around them both. What are you thinking? About starting over, about taking the horses west, maybe California or Oregon. Somewhere the Whitmore name means nothing. You'd leave this place? Where Margaret and Samuel? They're not here, Asher said soft. Took me 3 years to understand that. They're not in the ground out back or in these walls. They're in my memory, and those I carry with me. He turned to pull her close. You taught me that we can honor the dead by living. Clara thought of Thomas, of the fear that had ruled her for 3 years. It seemed distant now, like something that had happened to another woman. When do we leave? Spring. Soon as the pass is clear, we'll take the horses, what goods we can carry, and find somewhere new. He smiled slight. Always wanted to see the ocean. I've never seen it either. Clara pictured it, endless blue. Nothing behind them but road dust and fading memory. Yes, let's go see the ocean. They spent the rest of winter preparing. Clara learned to ride proper, to handle the horses with confidence. Her body healed, grew strong with good food and hard work. The nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of wide horizons. One evening, as Clara was mending harness, she felt a flutter in her belly. She went very still, hand pressed to her stomach. Too early to be sure, but she thought, maybe, what is it? Asher looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. Clara met his eyes, saw her future there. Nothing certain yet, just possibility. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by something that looked like wonder. He crossed to her, knelt beside her chair. Clara? Too soon to know for sure, but I think... She took his hand, pressed it to her still flat stomach. I think we're building more than just a new life. Asher's eyes went bright. He pulled her down into his arms, held her like she was made of spun glass. A baby. Maybe, probably. Clara laughed shaky. Are you happy? Happy? Asher pulled back to look at her. Clara, you've given me everything. Life, love, purpose. And now maybe... His voice broke. Yes, I'm happy. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again. They held each other as darkness gathered outside. 2 people who'd found light in the wilderness of loss. Soon they'd leave this place of ghosts and gunfire, but tonight they had warmth and hope and the promise of new life growing between them. Clara thought of the woman who'd fled Cedar Falls in a snowstorm, desperate and alone. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who'd learned to fight for her place in the world. Mrs. Clara Boone had earned her happiness with courage and blood and the choice to trust again. No regrets? Asher asked, soft against her hair. None, Clara said, and meant it. Everything that happened led me here, led us here. How could I regret that? Outside, wolves howled in the distance, wild and free. Inside, two survivors planned their future, painted it in words of ocean spray and California sunshine, and children who would never know the weight of their parents' ghosts. The price had been high, paid in pain and death and winter cold. But what they'd bought with that price was worth everything. They'd bought the right to choose their own path, together, toward whatever horizon called them home. They came at dawn, when the mist still clung to the valley floor. Clara was feeding the chickens when she saw the riders, too many to count quickly, moving with purpose up the trail. Her blood turned to ice. "Asher!" She ran for the cabin, scattering feed and frightened birds. Riders coming, lots of them. He was at the window in an instant, rifle in hand despite his healing shoulder. His face went grim. 20 men at least, some wearing badges. Clara's hand went to her belly, a protective gesture that had become habit these past weeks since she'd felt the first quickening. The sheriff said it was over. Morrison kept his word. But look, Asher pointed. That's a federal marshal's badge. The Whitmores must have called in favors from high up. They had minutes, maybe less. Clara grabbed the emergency pack they'd prepared, while Asher loaded weapons. But they both knew the truth. They couldn't fight 20 men, not with Clara 4 months along, not with Asher's shoulder still weak. The lead rider called out before they reached the yard. "Asher Boone, this is Federal Marshal James Crawford. I have a warrant for Clara Whitmore on charges of murder. Send her out peaceful, and no one needs to get hurt." "She's Clara Boone now," Asher called back. And she was cleared by Sheriff Morrison, self-defense, documented and sworn. State matter versus federal matter. Crawford replied, "The Whitmore family has connections in Washington. They want a proper trial, and they're going to get it. Now send her out." Clara started for the door, but Asher caught her arm. "No, they'll take you back to Cedar Falls, where the Whitmores own every judge and juror. You won't get justice there." "I won't let them hurt you," Clara said fierce. "Not for me. Not when—" She touched her belly again. Asher's jaw clenched. Then, louder, "Marshal Crawford, my wife is with child, 4 months along. She can't make that journey, especially not in custody." There was murmuring among the men. Then Crawford, "That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change my orders. Send her out. Boone, don't make this worse than it needs to be." Clara could see it in Asher's eyes, the moment he decided to fight, to die rather than let them take her. She couldn't let that happen. Not when they'd come so far, not when they had so much to live for. "Wait," she called out. "Marshal Crawford, I'll come willing, but I need your word, as a federal officer, that I'll get a fair trial. Not in Cedar Falls, but in a federal court." "Clara, no." She pressed fingers to Asher's lips. "Trust me, it's the only way." Then, louder, "Marshal, your word." "You have it. Mrs. Boone, federal court in Cheyenne, fair judge, impartial jury." Clara kissed Asher quick, whispered, "Find me. Whatever happens, find me." Then she walked out, head high, to face the waiting men. Marshal Crawford was younger than she'd expected, with intelligent eyes that took in her obvious condition, the healing cut on her face, the way she moved careful but proud. "Mrs. Boone," he said, tipping his hat. "I apologize for the necessity of this. Just keep your word, Marshal." They let her say goodbye to Asher, though 6 guns stayed trained on him. He gripped her hands tight, eyes burning with things he couldn't say in front of these men. "I'll be there," he promised. "Every day of the trial. You won't be alone." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Then they were putting her on a horse, hands bound in front so she could still grip the saddle horn, and riding away. She looked back once to see Asher standing in the yard, looking like a man watching his heart being torn out. The journey to Cheyenne took 5 days. Marshal Crawford, to his credit, treated her decent. He made sure she had enough food and rest, even found a woman in one town to help her with personal needs. But Clara could feel the hostile eyes of the other men. some of whom had known the Whitmore brothers. On the third night, as they camped by a stream, Crawford sat beside her at the fire. "You want to tell me your side of it?" Clara studied him. "Would it matter?" "Maybe. I've been a marshal 8 years. Learned to read people pretty good." He nodded at her belly. "Woman in your condition doesn't usually run unless she's got powerful reason." So Clara told him, not everything, but enough. The beatings, the fear, that final night. Crawford listened without comment, though his jaw tightened at parts. "And Jacob Whitmore," he asked when she finished, "came with 8 men to kill us. We defended ourselves." Crawford poked at the fire. "The Whitmore family paints a different picture. Says you seduced Boone, used him to hide from justice. Says you're a manipulator, a gold digger who married Thomas for money, then killed him when he tried to rein you in. And what do you think, Marshal?" He was quiet a moment. "I think you're either the best liar I've ever met, or a woman who's been through hell and found a way out." He stood, dusting off his pants. "Either way, it's for a judge and jury to decide, but I'll make sure you get that fair trial. You have my word on that, too." The Cheyenne courthouse was imposing, all brick and dignity. Clara was kept in a secured boarding house with a matron, which was better than a cell but still a prison. She was allowed visitors, and true to his promise. Asher was there the first morning. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept since she'd left, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Clara, are you all right? The baby?" "We're fine." She gripped his hands through the parlor table, the matron watching sharp from the corner. "Have you found a lawyer?" "Best I could afford. Man named Harrison Walsh. He's young but sharp, and he's not in anyone's pocket." Asher leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Clara, the Whitmores brought in a prosecutor from back east. They're spending serious money on this." Clara's heart sank, but she kept her face steady. "We knew they would. What else? They're bringing witnesses, people from Cedar Falls who'll swear Thomas was a saint, including," he hesitated, "including your own sister-in-law, Mary Whitmore. She's saying you were always unstable, jealous, given to fits of rage." Clara laughed bitter. Mary, who'd seen her bruises, who'd whispered apologies when Thomas wasn't around. Money and family loyalty had won over truth, as usual. The trial began on a Monday morning. Clara sat straight-backed despite the ache in her spine, her belly now obvious beneath her dark dress. Asher was right behind her in the gallery, his presence a steady warmth. The prosecutor, a slick man named Cornelius Blackwood, painted Clara as a scheming woman who'd trapped poor Thomas Whitmore into marriage, then killed him when he discovered her wanton nature. She fled the scene. Blackwood thundered, "Actions of a guilty woman?" Then she took up with Asher Boone, barely a week after her husband's death, living in sin until she could trap another man into marriage. Clara's lawyer, Walsh, was indeed young, but fought hard. He brought forth the boarding house records showing Thomas's drinking, testimony from the doctor who'd treated Clara's broken arm the previous year. But for every witness Walsh produced, Blackwood had 2 claiming Thomas was a devoted husband driven to distraction by his difficult wife. On the third day, Clara was called to testify. Walsh had warned her this would be brutal, and he was right. "Mrs. Boone," Blackwood began, voice dripping sympathy. "It must be difficult. Carrying a child while on trial for murder. Tell me, whose child is it?" Clara's hands clenched. "My husband's, Asher Boone's. Your current husband. But tell me, when exactly was this child conceived? Because by my count, it seems mighty close to when your first husband died." The implication hung poisonous in the air. Clara kept her voice steady. "The child was conceived after my marriage to Asher, well after, and we should simply take your word for that. The word of a woman who's already killed 1 husband? Objection." Walsh called out, "Prejudicial." "Sustained," the judge said. But the damage was done. Blackwood continued his attack for hours. He twisted every word, made her self-defense sound calculated, her fear sound like manipulation. By the time Clara stepped down, she was shaking with exhaustion and rage. That night, Asher held her while she cried angry tears. He made me sound like a monster, like I planned it all. The jury saw through him, Asher said, but Clara heard the doubt in his voice. They both knew how these things went. A woman's word against a dead man's reputation. The next day brought a surprise witness. Ellen Hutchins had traveled all the way from Wyoming. Clara's heart lifted seeing her weathered face. Ellen testified clear and strong about treating Clara's injuries, about the pattern of abuse she'd seen. But Blackwood attacked her too, suggesting she was a confused old woman, possibly paid off by Asher Boone. The closing arguments were passionate on both sides. Walsh spoke of a woman's right to defend herself, of the failure of the law to protect wives from violent husbands. Blackwood painted Clara as a black widow, moving from man to man, leaving death in her wake. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of Clara pacing the boarding house, unable to eat, the baby turning restless inside her. Asher stayed close, but they barely spoke. What was there to say? When word came that the jury had reached a verdict, Clara's legs nearly gave out. Asher steadied her, walked her into the courthouse with his arm strong around her waist. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor." Clara gripped Asher's hand so tight she feared she'd break his fingers. The foreman stood, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who'd nodded during Ellen's testimony. "On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Clara sagged against Asher, tears streaming. But the foreman wasn't done. "On the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter, we find the defendant guilty." The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Guilty. Even though they'd agreed it wasn't murder, they still couldn't let her walk free. A woman who killed her husband, even in self-defense, had to pay something. The judge called for order. "Mrs. Boone, you've been found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. However, given the circumstances presented at trial, and your current condition, I'm inclined toward leniency. I sentence you to 5 years. Clara's knees buckled. 5 years. Her baby would be walking, talking, wouldn't know her. Suspended, on condition of good behavior. You'll remain under court supervision for that time, required to report monthly to a federal officer. Any violation will result in immediate imprisonment." Clara barely heard the rest through her relief. Suspended. She wouldn't be separated from her child, from Asher. It wasn't full justice. That guilty verdict would follow her forever. But it was survival. Outside the courthouse, Asher pulled her close, both of them shaking. "It's over. It's finally over." "No," Clara said, feeling the weight of that verdict. The eyes of the Whitmore supporters still watching hostile. "But we're free to leave. That's enough." Marshal Crawford approached as they prepared to go. "Mrs. Boone, Mr. Boone." He tipped his hat. "Wanted to say, that was a brave thing, testifying like you did. Took courage. Lot of good it did." Clara said bitter. "Still guilty in their eyes." Crawford studied her. "Maybe so. But you're alive, free, and got a child coming. Seen too many women in your situation end up worse, much worse." He touched his hat again. "You folks take care. And Mrs. Boone, monthly reports can be sent by mail. Find somewhere far from here to send them from." Clara understood what he was offering. A chance to truly disappear. To build a life where the Whitmore name meant nothing. "Thank you, Marshal." That night, in their hotel room, Asher held her careful as she felt their baby move. "Where do you want to go?" "West," Clara said without hesitation. "California, somewhere near the ocean, like we planned. We'll leave soon as you're able to travel. Put all this behind us." Clara turned in his arms, studying the face of this man who'd stood by her through everything. "Do you regret it? Taking on my troubles? Only thing I regret is not finding you sooner." He kissed her gentle. "Might have saved us both some pain." They left Cheyenne 3 days later. Just another family heading west among many. Clara had written her first report to the federal office, establishing the pattern that would follow. Dutiful check-ins from an increasingly distant point. Until 5 years passed, and even that obligation ended. As their wagon rolled out of town, Clara didn't look back. Behind lay grief and violence and the weight of other people's judgment. Ahead lay the unknown, bright with possibility. "You all right?" Asher asked, glancing at her with concern. Clara placed her hand over his on the reins, felt their wedding rings click together. "I'm free. We're free. That's all that matters." The baby kicked strong under her ribs, as if agreeing. Clara smiled, thinking of teaching this child to be brave, to stand up for what's right, to know their worth regardless of what the world said. She'd been found guilty of surviving, but as the miles stretched between them and Wyoming, between them and all they'd lost, Clara knew the truth. Sometimes guilt was just another word for courage, and she'd wear both, like armor, for the rest of her days. Spring came early to the trail west. Clara watched the landscape change from her seat beside Asher on the wagon. Snow-capped mountains giving way to endless grassland. Then desert painted in colors she'd never imagined. Her belly had grown heavy with child, making travel uncomfortable, but she wouldn't complain. Every mile took them further from the shadow of the Whitmore name. They'd joined a small wagon train outside Fort Laramie. Safety in numbers for the journey. The other families were heading to Oregon mostly, with a few bound for California like them. Clara kept to herself at first, wary of questions. But Asher's easy manner with the horses soon had the other men seeking his advice. "When you do, Mrs. Boone?" asked Sarah Hutchinson, a motherly woman traveling with her husband and 3 children. They'd made camp for the night near a clear stream, the women gathering while the men tended stock. 2 months, maybe less," Clara said, hand on her belly. The baby had been active all day, responding to the wagon's sway. "First one." Clara hesitated. The lie would be easier, but she was tired of lies. "Yes, first living one. Anyway." Sarah's face softened with understanding. "I lost 2 between my second and third. Hard thing, but makes the ones who stay even more precious." That night, Clara told Asher about the conversation. "I didn't mention Thomas, just let her think the loss was natural." "Nothing wrong with that," Asher said, pulling her close. "That's your story to tell or not tell as you choose." They were 3 weeks into the journey when they had to cross through the town of Prairie Junction to resupply. Clara pulled her bonnet low, stayed with the wagon while Asher went for provisions. But in a frontier town, a pregnant woman drew notice. "Clara Mills?" Clara's blood chilled. She looked up to see a woman about her age, worn by sun and hard living, but familiar. Martha Henley, who'd lived 2 farms over from Clara's aunt back in Missouri. "Martha," Clara managed. "It's Clara Boone now." "Married. How wonderful." Martha's eyes went to Clara's belly, calculating. "Though I heard, didn't you marry that Whitmore boy from Cedar Falls? Whatever happened with that?" "He died," Clara said simply. "I remarried." Martha's eyes sharpened with curiosity. "Oh my, how terrible, and so quick to remarry, though I suppose a woman alone needs protection out here." Clara saw the moment Martha truly looked at her, the healing scar on her cheek, the way she held herself careful, the wariness in her eyes. She saw Martha's expression shift from curiosity to speculation. "Well," Martha said slowly, "I should get back. My husband's waiting. You take care of yourself, Clara." After she left, Clara sat frozen. Martha would talk. It was her nature. By evening, half the town would know Clara Mills Whitmore Boone was passing through, quick married and pregnant after her first husband's death. Asher returned to find her pale and shaking. "What happened?" "Someone recognized me. From before." Clara gripped his hands. "She'll talk. People will wonder. What if word gets back to—" "Hey." Asher cupped her face, made her meet his eyes. "We're 3 states away from Wyoming, and after tonight, we'll be gone from here too. Just another wagon heading west." But Clara couldn't shake the fear. That night she dreamed of Thomas, rising from his grave, pointing an accusing finger. She woke gasping to find Asher holding her. Just a dream," he murmured. "You're safe." "We're safe." The wagon train pushed on, following the Humboldt River through Nevada. The desert was brutal, scorching days, freezing nights, alkali dust that burned their throats. Clara had never imagined such desolation existed. But there was a terrible beauty to it, too, in the way the sunset painted the rocks blood red, in the absolute silence of star-filled nights. They were camped at a spring when Clara felt the first pain, just a twinge, but she knew. The baby was coming early, brought on by the hard travel. "It's time," she told Asher quiet, not wanting to alarm the camp. His face went white, then determined. All right. Sarah Hutchinson, she's delivered babies. I'll get her." The labor was long, complicated by their crude circumstances. Clara bit down on leather to keep from screaming, aware of the thin wagon walls, the other families trying to sleep. Sarah was calm and competent, but Clara could see worry in her eyes. "Baby's turned wrong," Sarah murmured to Asher. "I need to try to shift it." The pain that followed was beyond anything Clara had known. She thought of dying here in this desert, of leaving Asher with another ghost. But then Sarah was saying, That's it! Push now!" The baby came as dawn broke over the mountains. A girl, small but fierce, screaming her displeasure at the world. Clara wept as Sarah placed the infant on her chest. This tiny, perfect thing they'd made from love and survival. "She's beautiful," Asher whispered, touching the baby's dark hair with one trembling finger. "Just like her mama." "What'll you call her?" Sarah asked. "Cleaning up with practiced efficiency." Clara looked at Asher. They'd discussed names, but now, holding their daughter, only one felt right. Hope Margaret Boone." Asher's eyes filled. He kissed Clara's forehead, then the baby's. Perfect. They lost 3 days recovering. The wagon train waiting patiently. The other families brought food, offered help, admired the baby. Clara found herself accepted into the circle of women in a way she hadn't expected. Out here, past didn't matter as much as present. She was a new mother, needing support. That was enough. Hope was a good baby, nursing well, sleeping between feedings. Clara fashioned a sling to carry her, leaving her hands free for camp chores. Asher was endlessly gentle with both of them, checking constantly, bringing Clara extra food, holding Hope while she rested. "Never thought I'd have this again," he admitted one night, the baby sleeping between them. "Being a father, having a family. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "So happy it scares me sometimes, like I'll wake up and it'll all be gone. It's real," Clara promised. "We're real." They reached the Sierra Nevada mountains as autumn touched the peaks with gold. The passes were clear, but barely. Another few weeks and they'd have been trapped like the Donner Party years before. The descent into California was like entering another world. Green valleys, flowing rivers, air that smelled of growing things instead of dust. Hope was 2 months old, plump and bright-eyed, when they finally saw it, the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. Clara stood on the cliff overlooking the water, tears streaming. "We made it." Asher wrapped his arms around her from behind, Hope secure between them. "We made it." They settled in a small coastal town called Crescent Bay. Asher found work with a local rancher who bred horses. Clara took in sewing, Hope sleeping in a basket beside her. It was simple, quiet, exactly what they dreamed. The monthly reports to the federal office became routine. Clara wrote them matter of fact. Living quietly in California, no violations. C. Boone. She never gave the exact town, and no one ever asked. On Hope's first birthday, they received unexpected visitors. Pete and Ellen Hutchins had sold their Wyoming place, decided to try California themselves. They brought news from the old territory. The Whitmore family fell on hard times. Pete said over dinner, lost most of their money in bad investments. The old man died last winter, and the brothers scattered. No one talks much about what happened anymore. Clara felt something ease in her chest. Not forgiveness. She'd never forgive what Thomas had done to her. But release. The Whitmores had no power over her anymore. That night, she burned her journal from those dark days. Asher found her watching the pages curl to ash. "You sure?" he asked. "I don't need it anymore. I know who I was then. I know who I am now." She looked at him, at Hope, sleeping peaceful in her cradle. "This is my story now? Our story." As spring came again to California, Clara stood at the door of the small courthouse in Crescent Bay. Inside, Judge Patterson, a kind man who'd lost his own wife to childbirth, was reading her petition. "Mrs. Boone," he said finally, "you're asking me to officially change your name on all documents to Clara Boone, removing any reference to your previous married name?" "Yes, Your Honor. For my daughter's sake, so she never has to carry the weight of a name that isn't truly hers." The judge studied the papers, the death certificate for Thomas Whitmore, her marriage certificate to Asher, Hope's birth certificate. "I see no legal impediment, and given the circumstances documented in your criminal trial, I understand the request." He signed with a flourish. "From this day forward, you are legally Clara Boone, with no reference to any previous names required." Clara walked out feeling lighter than she had in years. The last chain to the past, severed. That evening, they had a small celebration, just the three of them, but it felt like enough. Hope toddled around on increasingly steady legs, babbling in her own language. Asher played his fiddle, a skill Clara hadn't known he possessed until recently. She sang along, old songs her mother had taught her before everything went wrong. "What are you thinking?" Asher asked later, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the ocean. "That I'm glad," Clara said simply. "For all of it, even the pain, because it brought me here." She looked at him. "Brought me to you. No regrets. No regrets." They were quiet a while, comfortable in the silence that had become their foundation. Then Hope tottered out, clutching a wooden horse Asher had carved. She held it up to Clara, grinning with her 4 tiny teeth. "Mama, horse!" Clara lifted her daughter onto her lap, pressed a kiss to her dark hair that was so like Asher's. "That's right, sweetling. Horse. She'll be a rider like her parents," Asher said, pride clear in his voice. "She'll be whatever she wants." Clara corrected. "That's why we came here, so she could choose." As stars began to appear in the California sky, Clara thought of all the women who hadn't made it out, who died at the hands of violent men or despair or the simple grinding cruelty of a world that saw them as property. She thought of Margaret, who'd loved Asher first, of the baby she'd lost before hope, of the girl she'd been before Thomas's fists taught her fear. She grieved them all, honored them with her survival. "Time to go in," Asher said as the air turned cool. "Got that new mare coming tomorrow? Owner says she's trouble, but I think she's just particular about who she trusts." "Sounds familiar," Clara said, smiling. "Best horses usually are." He helped her stand, Hope up drowsy in her arms. The ones worth keeping, anyway. Inside their small house, Clara tucked Hope into her bed, sang her to sleep with the same songs her own mother had sung. Then she joined Asher in their bed, curling into his warmth. "I love you," she said, words that still felt new and precious. "Love you back," he murmured. "Always." Outside, the Pacific waves crashed eternal against the shore. Inside, a family that had built itself from ashes and determination settled into sleep. Clara's last thought before dreams took her was of tomorrow. Ordinary tomorrow, with horses to tend and clothes to mend and a daughter to raise in freedom. She'd traveled so far from that woman who'd fled Cedar Falls in a snowstorm, miles and years and sorrows between, but every step had been worth it, because every step had led here, to this house, this man, this child, this life she'd claimed with blood and courage and the wild hope that somewhere, somehow, there had to be something better. And there was. Oh, there was. 5 years had passed since they'd settled in Crescent Bay. The small cabin had grown into a proper house with Asher's steady work, complete with a vegetable garden Clara tended and a paddock where Hope learned to ride. The ocean still sang them to sleep each night, but now it was a familiar lullaby, woven into the rhythm of their days. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching Hope practice with her pony in the yard. At 6, their daughter was fearless on horseback, a natural rider like both her parents. Her dark hair flew behind her as she urged the pony into a canter, Asher calling instructions from the fence. "Heels down. That's it, little bird. Easy on the reins." Clara smiled, hand resting on her belly where their second child grew. This pregnancy had been easier, free from the fear and flight that marked Hope's beginning. She was due in autumn, when the coastal mist rolled in gentle and cool. A knock at the door interrupted her peaceful watching. Clara opened it to find a young man, travel-worn and nervous. "Mrs. Boone, Clara Boone." Old instincts flared, the urge to deny, to close the door. But Clara had learned to face things straight on. "Yes? My name is William Henley." "My mother, Martha Henley, she knew you back in Missouri." Clara's heart stilled. Martha, who'd recognized her in Prairie Junction all those years ago. "I remember Martha. She passed last winter, but before she died, she gave me something. Said it belonged to you, that she'd been wrong to keep it." William pulled out a small leather journal, worn and familiar. Clara's breath caught. Her mother's diary, lost when she'd fled to her aunt's house after her parents died. She'd thought it gone forever. "Martha found it when your aunt's estate was settled," William explained. "She knew it was yours, but, well, she heard stories about what happened with your first husband. She thought maybe you wouldn't want reminders of the past." Clara took the diary with trembling hands. "What changed her mind?" William smiled slight. "She said she met you on the trail west, saw you pregnant and scared but still strong. Said any woman who could survive what you did deserved to have her mother's words back." After William left, Clara sat at the kitchen table, the diary unopened before her. Asher came in, Hope chattering at his side about her ride. "What's that?" he asked, noting her stillness. "My past." Clara said simply, "Come knocking one last time." That evening, after Hope was in bed, Clara finally opened the diary. Her mother's careful script brought tears, recipes and remedies mixed with worries about crops and children. But there were other entries too, darker ones. "James hit me again tonight. Clara saw. I told her Mama fell down, but she's getting old enough to know better. How do I teach her to be strong when I can't protect myself?" Clara's father, she'd blocked out so much, but reading her mother's words brought it flooding back. The cycle she'd almost repeated, would have repeated if not for that night Thomas fell. "My mother lived it too," she told Asher. "The fear, the violence." "She died before she could escape it." Asher pulled her close. "But you didn't. You broke free. I almost didn't." Clara thought of those dark days, the times she'd considered ending it all. "So many times I almost gave up." "But you didn't," Asher repeated. "You survived. You're here. We're here." Clara closed the diary, but didn't put it away. Tomorrow she'd read more, would share the good memories with Hope, stories of her grandmother's courage in whatever ways she could manage it. The past didn't have to be buried to be overcome. Sometimes it just needed to be seen clearly, acknowledged, then set in its proper place. The summer passed peaceful and full. Clara's belly grew round. Hope practiced reading with stubborn determination, and Asher trained a magnificent stallion for a wealthy rancher from San Francisco. Their life had found its rhythm, work and rest, laughter and quiet evenings, the ordinary magic of a family living free. Then, on a day when the fog hung low over the coast, Sheriff Morrison arrived. Clara recognized him instantly despite the years. He'd aged, gone gray and thin, but those careful eyes were the same. She stood frozen in her garden, basket of tomatoes forgotten. "Mrs. Boone," he said, touching his hat. "Been a long time." "Sheriff?" Clara's voice came out steady, though her heart raced. "You're far from Wyoming." "Retired last year. My daughter lives in San Francisco. Convinced me to come west." He studied her, the pleasant house, the garden, Hope's toys scattered on the porch. You've done well for yourself. We've worked hard. Morrison nodded slow. I'm sure you have. Not here to cause trouble, ma'am. Just wanted to say something I should have said years ago. Clara waited, hand protective over her belly. I knew, Morrison said simply. About Thomas Whitmore. What he was doing to you. Half the town knew. We all looked the other way because the Whitmores had money, had influence. He met her eyes direct. I failed you, failed my duty. Wanted to say I'm sorry for that. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a weight she hadn't known she carried. You gave me a fair investigation after. That's more than most would have done. Wasn't enough, not near enough. Morrison looked out at the ocean. I think about it sometimes. How many women I failed over the years, looking the other way. How many ended up dead because I didn't want to make waves. You can't change the past. Sheriff, no, but I can do better going forward. Been working with my daughter. She's a reformer, pushing for laws to protect women, children, maybe make up for some of what I didn't do. They talked a while longer. Careful conversation about the town, the weather, Hope's pony. Before he left, Morrison paused at the gate. That federal marshal, Crawford, he said you showed real courage at the trial. Said you told your truth even when they twisted it against you. Lot of good it did. They still found me guilty. Of surviving, Morrison said. And here you are, still surviving, still living. That's its own justice. Mrs. Boone, the best kind. Maybe. After he left, Clara stood in her garden until Asher came looking for her. Who was that? A ghost, Clara said, but a peaceful one, for once. That night, she felt the first labor pains. This time, there was no fear, no desperate wagon train camp. The local midwife came, efficient and kind. Hope was sent to stay with neighbors, protesting that she wanted to help. The labor was long but uncomplicated. As dawn broke over the Pacific, Clara delivered a son, healthy and strong, with her eyes and Asher's stubborn chin. What'll we call him? Asher asked, cradling his son with wonder that hadn't dimmed since Hope's birth. Clara thought of all the names that had shaped her story. Thomas, who'd tried to break her. Jacob, who'd hunted her. Crawford, who'd given her a chance at justice. Morrison, who'd finally acknowledged the truth. James, she said finally. James Peter Boone, after my father and yours. Asher looked surprised. Your father, but he was more than what he became. Clara said, maybe if someone had helped my mother, things would have been different. This James will know better. We'll make sure of it. As if in agreement, little James wailed, demanding attention already. Hope returned that afternoon, approaching her brother with the careful curiosity of a child whose world had just shifted. She touched his tiny fingers, eyes wide when he gripped hers. He's so small, she whispered. You were smaller, Clara told her, born early in the desert, with nothing but wagon canvas for walls. Tell me again, Hope demanded, settling careful beside her mother. Tell me about the journey. So Clara told her. Edited for young ears but truthful in its essence, about the snowstorm that brought her to Papa, the long trek west, the first sight of the ocean. Hope listened with the intensity she brought to everything, already storing the words away. That evening, Asher brought out his fiddle while Clara nursed James. Hope danced in the yard, spinning with arms wide to catch the sunset light. It was a moment of such perfect ordinariness that Clara's throat tightened. You all right? Asher asked, noting her tears. Just happy? Clara said, so happy it almost hurts. He kissed her forehead. You've earned it, every bit of it. As night settled over Crescent Bay, Clara wrote in her new journal, not a record of pain this time, but of joy. She wrote about Hope's first words, James's birth, the way Asher's hand stayed gentle even after all the hardness life had shown him. She wrote about the garden producing more than they could eat, about neighbors who'd become friends, about the gray whale they'd seen from the cliffs last winter. Small things, ordinary things, the things that made a life. Later, Asher asleep beside her and both children peaceful in their beds. Clara stepped out onto the porch. The moon laid a silver path across the water, and she thought of another night, years ago, when Asher had first taken her hand in the darkness. How frightened she'd been then, how certain that happiness was for other people, not for her. "Thank you," she whispered to the night. To Margaret, who'd loved Asher first. To her mother, who'd wanted better for her daughter. To her own younger self, who'd found the courage to run. "Thank you for surviving long enough to have this." The ocean answered with its eternal rhythm. And Clara knew that some stories, the important ones, never really end. They just transform, passed down in the courage taught to daughters, in the gentleness shown to sons, in the love that builds itself fresh each morning despite all the reasons it shouldn't exist. Inside, James stirred, hungry again. Clara went to him, lifted him to her breast, hummed the old songs while he nursed. Through the window, she could see Asher's profile in their bed, the space beside him waiting for her return. Tomorrow, Hope would demand riding lessons before breakfast. The mare would need tending. The garden would need water. Life would need living. Clara smiled, settling into the rocking chair Asher had made while she was pregnant. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other across the hills, but their wildness didn't frighten her anymore. She'd learned her own wildness, claimed it, used it to build this gentle life. "Once upon a time," she whispered to James, who'd fallen asleep at her breast, milk-drunk and content. "There was a woman who thought she was broken, but she wasn't broken at all. She was just becoming strong, and when she finally found her strength, she discovered she could build anything, even happiness, even home, even love that lasted." The baby sighed in his sleep, one tiny hand curled against her heart. Clara rose careful, placed him back in his cradle, then slipped back into bed beside Asher. He pulled her close without waking, and she fit herself against him. Two pieces of something whole. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, its own joys. But tonight, Clara Boone slept peaceful in the life she'd claimed, surrounded by love she'd thought impossible, strong in the knowledge that she'd earned every moment of this happiness with courage, blood, and the wild determination to survive. The ocean sang them all to sleep, and in that music was the promise that some stories, the best ones, begin with ending and end with beginning again, and again, and again. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. If you enjoyed Clara and Asher's journey, please subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, survival, and love against the backdrop of America's frontier. Share your thoughts about their story. What touched you most? Your engagement keeps these stories alive. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizons.